And good morning. How's everyone doing today? Dr. Roddenberry coming to you from Western New York at the Chautauqua Institution. Hope everybody had a great weekend and managed to take care of the exam. Did a good job on the exam. So how are you all doing? Go ahead and type in the chat bar if you're here. Let me know. It's good to see everybody this morning. How's my sound coming through? Can you hear me well enough? Just want to make sure everything's coming through. It's good to see you. We finished exam 3 this weekend. Hope you did well. If you had a problem with the exam, don't hesitate to send me a text or an email and we will figure something out. Good morning, Lewis. Still sleepy. Sound is good. I hear you. Hi, Adrian. Good to see you. Thanks for coming today. It's great to see both of you. Fantastic. Looks like we have a few more people on the chat bar as well. Fantastic. Welcome to all of you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you finished the exam and everything went well there. We are in week 7 now. Week 7. We have 2 more weeks of class. You are almost done. I hope you're as excited as I am. It's always nice to finish up a semester and have everything turn out well. And I know you as students have been working really hard this summer, managing all your responsibilities and taking classes. And I hope to reward you soon. Good day, Mariah. Good morning, Gustavo. Gustavo. It's great to see both of you. Are you still in the Dominican, Gustavo, or have you come back to us now? Go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know. Okay. Oh, yes, he is still in the Dominican. Lucky you, buddy. We all wish we could be there with you. Well, at least I wish I could be there with you. But unfortunately, it's not. I just did a speed check on the internet this morning. It seems to be running a little bit slow. If you have any problems, please type in the chat bar and I'll adjust the broadcast accordingly. I'm going to go with my video as long as I can until I have to switch the video off. So, without further ado, let's go to the PowerPoint. Today is chapter 12, as you can see over here on the side. This is social psychology. This is my area of psychology. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about what social psychology studies, and then I'm going to talk about attributional styles, how we explain what happens to us in the world. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how groups interact our thinking and our behavior. I understand Gustavo says he couldn't make it to the live stuff because of his internet coverage. That is something that I, as an online teacher, am acutely aware of, Gustavo. So that's cool. Hopefully, you won't be able to come back this week either. So hopefully we'll see you another week, Gustavo, but I'm glad, hopefully you've got your online problems sorted out. Okay, 6 people here. That's a pretty good audience. We're 9:04. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Social psychology is the psychology that studies how groups function together. Here's the standard social psychology definition: is the scientific study of how the real or imagined presence of other people affects the way we feel, the way we think, and the way we behave. Social psychologists are not looking for culture. They are looking for things that transcend culture. We are looking for universal group processes. I see we have Juliet on the broadcast. Thanks for stopping in. We're talking a little bit about social psychology. Now, social psychology is a subfield of psychology. You can get your PhD in social psychology just like I did, and that would make you a social psychologist. Most social psychologists are going to be found in schools and universities. Um, we are researchers for the most part. Although occasionally you will find a social psychologist maybe working in forensic psychology or in industrial and organizational psychology. I have two friends that are working in those industries. Now, look at the blue on the page. This is not cultural psychology. I'm not interested in understanding how one culture affects a person's behavior and how people are different because they come from different cultures. Instead, I'm looking for universal processes that underlie all cultures, if you will. And I'm not necessarily interested in sociology. I'm not interested in talking about social institutions, how they work, how they don't work. Instead, we're looking for universal group processes that function within the structure. So, how does the interaction between two or three or four people go? Is really what we're interested in. Now, if you look over here on the far left, these are some of the topics that social psychologists are interested in. We're going to talk a little bit today about attributions, which is how people explain their behavior and other behaviors. Why do people do the things they do? We're going to talk a little bit about group identity. What does it mean to be in a group, and how does that change the way you're thinking? We're going to talk a little bit about attitude change. Social psychologists are interested in how people are persuaded by another person. Social psychologists are interested in close relationships, romantic research on the romantic cycle. Are going to be interesting to social psychologists because a romantic pair a romantic dyad is the smallest group there can possibly be, right? And then social cognition. See that term cognition from chapter 7 coming back in? Um, and I told you that cognition is the dominant way to do psychology now. And there are social psychologists who study how groups change the way we think. So, being in a group of people similar to you or a group of people different to you, how does that change the very way you think about yourself and you think about other things and pieces of information that that's presented to you? So, these are sort of the things that social psychologists are interested in. Let's talk a little bit for a couple minutes about attributions. And attributions are the explanations we give for why things happen. When we talk about attributions in social psychology, we're usually talking about trying to explain why other people did things. So, why did Gustavo go to the Dominican Republic? Why did uh, why was Juliet 3 minutes late to the live broadcast today? Why did Adrian feel the need to tell me that they can hear me well? Um, why do these things happen? So, an attribution is an attempt to provide a causal explanation for our behavior as well as the behavior of others. Why did that happen? Why was she nice to me? Why did I fail that test? Now, what I want you to know is that human beings use attributions to make themselves feel better and also to give order to the world so that things make sense and are predictable. There are two general kinds of attributions. There's what we might call a situational attribution, and there's what we might call a dispositional or a personal attribution. I think your book's going to call it a personal attribution. I've called it a dispositional attribution as long as I've been in social psychology, but either one is fine. So there are two types of attributions: situational and personal. And so when somebody comes up and does something to you, when I'm nice to you, when somebody else asks you a question or smiles at you, you might ask yourself, why did they do that? A situational attribution is when you come to the conclusion that that person did that behavior because that's the kind of person they are. The behavior occurred because it was something about a person's uh, uh, this is the personal attribution. The behavior occurred because that's the kind of personality they have. That's the kind of person they are. That's what we call a personal or a dispositional attribution. So maybe you have a friend of yours that got angry earlier this morning or yesterday, and somebody said, wow, why is Chloe so angry? Why was Ted so angry yesterday? Why did that guy start screaming? You might say, well, they screamed because they're that kind of person. They just have a bad temper. That's what we would call a dispositional attribution. Now, it can be anything about you. It can be that you have a bad temper. It can be that you're not a nice person. It can be that you were raised that way. But it's anything that explains the cause of the behavior as occurring specifically because of something about you or your past. Now, the other way we explain behaviors is to say, you know what, maybe that person was having a bad day. Maybe there was something unique about that person's moment. That's what we call a situational attribution. So the behavior occurred because of something about the person's current situation. You know what? Muhammad was angry because his car just broke down this morning and he's in a bad attitude. Or Muhammad just received an F on a very important exam. So there are two general types of attributions. So we have these situational attributions and personal attributions. Now, why are these interesting? Well, social psychologists have found that human beings tend to use them in very interesting patterns that demonstrate something about who we are inside as social beings. Now, the most interesting one is what's known as the fundamental attribution error. This is sort of the most basic one. And this is the tendency to overestimate the effect that personality has on another's behavior. People, more often than not, underestimate the impact of situational events and the impact that they have on people's behavior. When somebody is nice to you, when somebody is friendly to you, when somebody is mean to you, we tend to assume it is because of something in their personality. This is known as the fundamental attribution error. Now, this is part of a larger bias we have called the actor-observer bias. What we're going to find is that most people tend to discount the effect that personality has on their own behavior. Most people tend to underestimate the impact that their own personality has on their behavior, but they tend to overestimate the effect that personality has on other people's behavior. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm a waiter and I'm waiting tables and I am rude to a table. If you ask me why was I rude to the table, I would say, you know what, I'm really busy tonight. I'm stressed out. I've got so many tables. I was not nice because I was busy and in a hurry. On the other hand, if you ask the group of people sitting at that table who I was rude to, if you ask them why I was rude, they're going to say because that waiter is just a rude person in general. So the weird thing is people have this interesting pattern where they overestimate the amount that personality has, the impact that personality has on other people's behavior, but underestimate the impact that personality has on their own behavior. And if you think about it, thinking that everybody does things because it's their personality makes the world more predictable to you. If everybody is doing the things they are doing because it's who they are, that allows you, the social being, to pick and choose your strategies for interacting with the world. On the other hand, thinking of yourself as being driven by situations rather than your personality allows you to feel more flexible as a person, to assume the flexibility of your behavior. So, both of these kind of work to help you understand and interact with other people. Now, it turns out that people also give sort of this order and organization to the world by victim blaming. And the just world hypothesis is really an example of victim blaming. Typically, when something bad happens to a person, we look for an explanation that will explain why that happened. This is often talked about within the context of rape victims. We look for a reason why they brought the rape on. Was she dressed provocatively? Was she acting provocatively? We look for things like this because we like to give order to the world by understanding people's outcomes as being a product of things that they did that weren't nice. And so these attributional styles, the fundamental attributional error, which is sort of fits in with the actor observer bias, and the just world hypothesis, is a demonstration of how people use the idea of situations. Sometimes they pay attention to situations, sometimes they don't pay attention to situations. And this allows them to build a world that makes sense, that has order, in which you have maximum flexibility to respond to people in that world. Now, human beings engage in a lot of behavior that we think is unfair towards one group or another group. And yes, social psychologists are interested in prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. But instead of thinking of them sort of as moral or sociological things, we think of them as group processes, as basic level information processing processes that human beings go through. So, prejudice, negative feelings or belief towards members of another group. Stereotypes are oversimplifications of the qualities of the members of a group. Think of a stereotype as a schema for a particular group. So, what are all of the associations that pop into your mind when you think penguins, or red people, or green people, or white people, or black people? What are the instant associations that pop up into your head? Stereotypes are schemas, if you will. And discrimination is just behavior that differentiates among group members. Now, they're going to say unjustified, inappropriate. Yes, but you know what? You can even discriminate in subtle ways as well. So, prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination are thought of as group processes and are studied in the field of social psychology. Why exactly do we have negative feelings towards other groups? Why do we simplify our cognitive structures of other groups? And why do we treat members of other groups inappropriately? Now, what a psychologist would say, what a social psychologist would say, this is not because something's wrong with the culture. We're not going to say it's because this group of people is bad or this group of people is good. Instead, what we're going to try to argue is that the roots of these items, of these concepts, the roots of these behaviors and beliefs are sort of rooted in the way in which human beings think about themselves and relate themselves to groups in general. So, I want you to think of two theories, and two theories kind of put together create what we think of as the understanding for why people like to manage uh, beliefs about groups and why people like to put other groups down or behave negatively towards other groups. So, what these researchers argue is that group and self are actually one in the same. When you think about yourself and who you are, when you're writing a schema, let's say a schema of yourself, a description of yourself, right? You can think of your group as being one part of whom you are. So people have a tendency to categorize themselves into more than one groups, and they build their self on a membership. So let's go to this whiteboard here. So you could say Chris. He is short. He is funny. He is he is blue-eyed. Okay, so if you think about it, these are all individual characteristics of Chris. But Chris, as a larger thing, also includes groups. I am a psychologist. I am also a Southerner. I am also male. And I am also white. Now, what you can see is this, and this are individual selves. This, and this is what we might call my group identity. My group identity. Does that make sense? Now, what social categorization argues is that human beings categorize themselves into in-groups or out-groups. And they build their self on membership in these groups. Now, here's the thing. I'm not always thinking of myself as Chris the psychologist. I only do that when I come in to teach this class. I don't think of myself as Chris the male unless I'm with a group of females. I don't think of myself as Chris the Caucasian until I visit Mexico or South America and I'm around people who are different than me. So we're not always thinking about this sense of groupness. Mm-hmm. Exactly, right? So being in a group is a part of our brain, is a part of our self-concept that can either be active or not active. And different parts of your groupness, different group aspects of yourself can be activated at any time. Now, not only do people have a sense of groupness in them, built into their sense of self, people like to think of themselves as a positive person. And so they like to think about themselves in terms of positive groups. And if you hurt a person's group self, they will move to their individual self if they can. And people like to maintain a positive view of their sense of self. And so that's social identity theory. So people have this need for self-esteem. And depending upon what's happening, we will escape between our personal identity and our social identity, depending upon our psychological needs. If things are going well for you and you're in a situation in which everybody is like you, you'll focus on your personal identity. On the other hand, if I start picking on you as an individual, right, what you might do is slide to a social identity to feel better about yourself. So if I'm challenging you, if I'm threatening you, individually, you might use your sense of groupness as a way to feel good about yourself. So let's say we might ask the question why some people why it seems like some people who are the most prejudiced against other groups have the worst lives themselves. And what you might see is that person doesn't feel good about who they are as an individual. Maybe they haven't achieved enough vocationally. Maybe they haven't achieved enough academically. Maybe they haven't achieved enough economically. And so their personal identity is challenged. So what they do is they use their social identity to make themselves feel better. All right. And so we divide the world into in groups and out groups. So, for example, we are all Wake Tech colleagues. So we are all an in group. However, I am a teacher and you are students. So you are an out group if we think about students versus teachers. If we think about North Carolinians versus other parts of the country, we are all living in North Carolina, so we are all North Carolinians. Um, I can think of this world in terms of men, my in group, and females, my out group. And so you can have many different in groups and, of course, many different out groups. And what social identity and social identity says is that we can use these groups to help manage our sense of self esteem. And so it would argue that a lot of people, if you put them in the right situation and challenge their individual self, they will demonstrate these these sort of group comparison behaviors. And in fact, what they show is that in group favoritism, which you might call discrimination, is a pretty basic fundamental group process. In fact, if you look down here at the bottom, they did this cool experiment called the minimal group paradigm, where they put people into groups and they didn't even tell them what this group was, why these people were in this group, and they didn't even let them meet group members. All right, so they brought people into a lab, put them in separate rooms, had them do a task, and they said, okay, based on this task we just did, we're dividing the 6 people in this experiment into 2 groups. There's your group, Group A, and there's 3 other people in Group B. Now, this person is told that they've been categorized into a group, but they've never met any of these group members, and they don't really know why, what quality they share with these group members. Even in these situations, what they find is that people will demonstrate in-group favoritism by rewarding more points or money or whatever is given in the experiment. They will reward it to members that are in their own group as opposed to an out group. And so what this suggests is that groups are part of our identity. And so we move back and forth between our group identity and our social identity fluidly based upon the situation and our psychological needs, right? So you may be in a convenience store. I remember I was in a convenience store one time. It was me and the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper happened to be an ethnic minority. So it was a minority. Now, I didn't think at all about my ethnicity until I remember another person walked in and said hello, and I could tell they connected. And suddenly, I became acutely aware of myself as a white man. And it was weird how my self-definition switched from me being just a guy in a convenience store to all of a sudden I became acutely aware of myself as a white person in a convenience store. And so I moved from my individual self, my individual identity, my personal identity, to my sense of group identity in just a second. And what happens in groups is that what happens to human beings is that they're completely normal people, but you put them into a situation which activates a sense of groupness, and people will begin engaging in ways that are quite negative and cruel towards other group members. So, two members from different ethnic groups may sit around and talk and be friends all day long. You take those people who are quite nice to one another, take them back home at night, and put them into a group of others that are similar to them in a highly charged situation, and suddenly that person will begin demonstrating these group related phenomenon of prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. It's almost as if you activate the sense of groupness, and then that changes the way the person thinks. Okay, now let's see, where is that? In fact, in fact, uh, in fact, there's something called group polarization. I don't think it's in your book, so I didn't talk about it. But what happens is if you put a group of people into a room together who share a similar attitude and have them discuss that attitude, they will become even more extreme in their belief than they initially were. Get a group of liberals together, have them talk for 30 minutes. You will find that their opinions become even more liberal the more they talk. Have a group of conservatives, put them in a room, let them talk for 30 minutes. What you will find is that they will amp up each other's opinions, and they will become even more conservative in opinion than they were at the beginning of the group. So the weird thing is when you move people in and out of groups, it changes the way they think about themselves and how they evaluate other people. Um, Sometimes a teacher can have a belief based on a person's group that can then cause that teacher to engage in behaviors that change that person's outcome. This thing called the self-fulfilling prophecy has been demonstrated in schools many different times, and actually with animal models too. What they find is that if a teacher is told that a student is going to do well or poor for some reason or another, the teacher changes their behavior subtly towards that particular student and can affect the way and affect their performance. So, a teacher's belief in your ability can greatly impact your performance. This guy named Robert Rosenthal, a Harvard professor, did this really neat study where he went to third grade teachers and he picked students out and he told the teachers, he's like, "Hey, listen, these students have been shown they're ready. Their test scores suggest that they're going to explode in intellect this year. These kids are ready to go." And they would name a subset of the students in the class, and then they compared students' performance at the end of the year, and they found that the students that they had randomly identified had amazing years academically and had really shot past all of the other students in terms of academic performance. And so what Robert Rosenthal realized is that sometimes people's belief in whether or not you're going to be this minority or that person or this talented person will affect the way they act towards you, which will then affect your performance. So think of all the times you've been in situations where you've judged a person based upon a group identity that they may have, saying, "You know what, I'll bet that this person is going to do this because people in their group tend to do this." These self-fulfilling prophecies can actually lead to the outcomes that you think are going to happen. Now, uh, uh, it's also been shown. That stereotypes, beliefs about the in-group, can sometimes harm the individual's performance. So, not only in that schema that I wrote up here. Okay, and that schema that I wrote up here about Chris, because I said that he's white and a male, I might have sort of negative characteristics. So because he's male, he has a bad temper. Or because he's white, I might say he can't run fast. Okay? Now, here's the deal. These stereotypes that we have, are these group identities that we have positive qualities and negative qualities as well. And when activated, these negative qualities, if we can't escape away from these negative group qualities, they may impact our behavior. Research has been shown. There is, I think I talked to you about it last week. I suggested to you that on average, IQ scores of minorities are not quite as high as the IQ scores of Caucasians, and Caucasian IQ scores are not as high as Asian IQ scores. Now, you might wonder, why exactly does it happen? Why do minority students not do as well on standardized tests as non-minority students? And it might have to do with stereotype threat. A nifty experiment demonstrated that these IQ differences, minorities and non-minorities, go away if the minorities don't know that they are taking an IQ test. So they gave minorities a test, told them it was a very valid indicator of intellectual ability, and that it was an IQ test. Gave that to minorities and non-minority students. They gave the same test to a different group of non-minorities and minorities, but instead of telling them it was a predictive IQ test, they told them that this was just a problem-solving exercise. And lo and behold, the differences between the minority and non-minority students went away in the second group. And some people suggest is that sometimes these stereotypes that we have about ourselves will actually cause us so much anxiety that we fulfill the stereotype that we are afraid to believe. Now, what I'm going to do on Wednesday in our webinar is I'm going to try to demonstrate to you that every last one of us has biases that affect how we interact with other people. Okay, I promise you, you have biases against either females in science, or maybe thinking that minorities are more violent, or thinking that, or you might have negative feelings about LGBTQ people, and you might not even be aware of these things. And what we're going to do on Wednesday is try to uncover some of these and talk about what these automatic biases mean. Now, we know what old-fashioned racism is, that obvious in-your-face racism where people just blurt right out the stereotype that they believe about you, or they may treat you negatively and identify your group identity as they do that. But that's what we might call old-fashioned racism, the racism of our grandfathers. Instead, social psychologists focus a lot on what we might call modern racism, which is subtle forms of racism that coexist with the rejection of overtly racist beliefs. So I may say that I am egalitarian in my belief, but when I am on a dark street with this particular group that I say I'm not afraid of, without noticing it, my feet pick up speed and I walk a little bit faster, right? So I wasn't overtly racist, but my behavior suggests a certain negative belief of this group. That's what we might call, in a sense, a modern form of this out-group rejection. Now, I told you social psychologists love social cognition, and or like cognitive research. There is nifty research by these two researchers, Banaji and Greenwald, that showed that people have both automatic and controlled processes that affect the way they think about members of other groups. Their contention is that all of us have automatic prejudices, automatic biases towards groups. We all have that. Every last one of us is built. No matter how egalitarian you say you are, you still have judgments about people from other ethnic groups. You African American students have judgments about me, the Caucasian. I have judgments about you, the African American, and we cannot get away with that. Men have judgments about female. These are what we might call the automatic processes of stereotype formation. We all know these stereotypes deep down, and they're automatic. What Banaji and Greenwald argue is that some of us become egalitarian by learning how to control these automatic processes. So they argue the difference between a person who is racist and a person who is not racist is that the non-racist person has learned to effortfully control their biases that we all have. Okay? Does that make sense? So, in a sense, they're arguing that we all have these prejudices that we've learned. They're buried really way down deep, and they affect how we think and process information. But what happens? What happens is if you're an egalitarian person, your parents or whoever teaches you over time to control these automatic thoughts. Okay? Now, how do they show this? What they do is they use what's known as a cognitive load manipulation. And a cognitive load is any task that you have to do that takes a little bit of effort. Usually in psychology, a cognitive load manipulation is going to be something like adding up simple numbers. So 4 plus 3, 3 plus 2, 1 plus 4, 3 plus 1, 2 plus 2. Those are really simple math equations, but they take a little bit of your mental energy. Okay? Now, what they do is they take people who they have them fill out a questionnaire to discover whether or not this person is an egalitarian personality or a racist, an overtly racist personality. Now let's focus on the egalitarian personalities. What they find is that when you have them make judgments about members of different groups, they do not show these stereotype biases. They do not show stereotypes. However, if you look at the racist person when they're making these judgments, this overtly racist person, you'll notice that they make the stereotypic judgments. So the egalitarian person doesn't make the stereotypic judgments, but the racist person makes the stereotypic judgments. Now, they rerun this experiment with a different group of people, but what they do is they give them the cognitive load. Okay, I want you to make these judgments about people of different ethnic groups, but while you're doing that, I want you to add up these numbers that I'm going to be flashing at you. Okay, so they have the person do the evaluation task, but they do it under cognitive load. And what they find is that even the people who say they are egalitarian, they start making stereotypic judgments just like the overtly racist people do when they're making judgments under a cognitive load. So what Banaji and Greenwald argue is that we have these biases built deeply into our system, but what we learn to do is to effortlessly control our stereotypes and our stereotypic judgments. So when I see my Dominican student, I don't make a judgment about Gustavo based upon what I think about Dominicans. If I don't know if one of you is from the Congo is from Africa, and I'm interacting with you, I don't let my beliefs about what African students would be like, I don't let those stereotypes into my judgments. However, if I get busy and I'm stressed out and one of you comes to me, what they would argue is because I'm under a cognitive load, I'm not able to control that automatic bias that I have in my system. Okay? Now, how am I going to demonstrate to you that this is true? What we are going to do on Wednesday night is we are going to take the implicit bias test, where I'm going to ask you to make rapid fire judgments about words and people. And what we're going to see is if we can discover the implicit biases that you say you don't have. So even though you say you think of you are egalitarian in your beliefs about minorities and being violent, we're going to see whether or not that is true. You all say that you uh, 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 have no biases against LGBTQ people. We'll see if that's true when we put you under a cognitive load. So hopefully this can let you understand. Now, what am I trying to suggest to you in this? I'm not trying to suggest that racism, prejudice, and discrimination are good. I'm not trying to suggest to you that they are good. But rather than think of them as moral things, I think of them as products that are built into the cognitive system of the human being. And they're based on this idea that part of our self description is the group that we belong to and our desire to feel positive about ourself and the group that we belong to. And that we have these automatic processes that are activated when we're not aware of it. And these automatic processes may affect how we respond to other people in terms of other people, in terms of self-fulfilling prophecy, how we respond to difficult events that challenge our stereotypical beliefs about our own group, and that these group processes actually affect our basic level judgments about people from different groups. Now, being in groups also affect our overt behavior too. Our performance is affected by group factors. One of the oldest findings in social psychology actually comes from the 1890s, showed that sports performers, racers, cyclists, any other type of exertion related activity, these people perform better when they are in the presence of others, when they are in a group of people, as opposed to when they are alone. So take any one of these sprinters in Group A and have them sprint this race by themselves for a timer, right? And then have them run as a group of runners. And what you're going to find is each one of these racers is going to beat their time if beat their individual time if they are running in a group. This was known as social facilitation, and it turns out that the presence of others makes human beings perform simple tasks much quicker and much easier. People will yell louder. People will run faster. People will ride their bikes faster. People will work harder if they're competing and they're around the people they're competing against. If you see, I've got an asterisk. However, the crazy thing is this extra arousal that comes from being around people tends to impair our ability to perform complex tasks. If you remember, we talked several weeks ago about optimal arousal. And the weird thing is the presence of other people tends to increase our level of arousal, which makes us perform better on really simple tasks. But the presence of other people causes our arousal to rise too high for complex tasks, and it impairs our performance. Now, this is on competitive tasks. It turns out when you're in collaborative tasks, does music have the same effect on people? So you're talking about working out with your music. You know, the research has social psychology doesn't really look at music as a factor that affects performance, but you're probably talking about being able to work out harder in the gym. Situational factors do affect our behavior, so that there's a good reason to suggest that might be true, Gustavo. Now, also, if you've ever been in a group project before, you know that people, when they get in a group project, there are always those people who loaf, who don't pull their load in a group project. The reason I don't design and assign group projects is because of social loafing. Whenever you put people into a collaborative task and you give them one general output for that entire task, and you don't measure individual output, individuals will always slack off in a group, and more people is worth. Social loafing. So the weird thing is sometimes if we're in a group and we're engaging in individually measured behavior, sometimes the presence of the group will facilitate our behavior. On the other hand, if we're in the presence of a group and it's a collective output and we're not being measured individually, a group will always lower our motivation and our level of output. Okay, crap, I've run out of time. You know what? I'm going to have extra time on tomorrow, and so we'll talk a little bit about group behaviors, and then I'm going to talk about influence, which is how other people influence, how groups influence and change our behavior. We're going to talk about advertising and doing bad things. So hopefully you'll come back tomorrow. I want to thank the audience. It looks like we had a great audience. We had as many as 8 people in class at one time, and a lot of you, I think, stayed for the whole lecture. So I want to thank you very much for doing that today. I hope you learned something interesting, something of value. And like I said, I like to think of prejudice and racism and discrimination as a function of group processes, as opposed to thinking of it in sociological terms. But that's up to you. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and cut off this broadcast. I've got to be in my next class at 10 o'clock. It's my Psych 118 class, so we're taking care of that in just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, send me a text later today. I don't mind jumping into Microsoft Teams and having a short discussion with you. Gustavo, you have a great day too. Enjoy the Dominican. Julia, thanks. Mariah, thanks. Louis, Tapia, Adrian, it was great to see everybody today. Y'all have a fabulous afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Bye.